people's houses. And there was even times where, they would come out and catch us and tell us to leave. And, there was no other places to go. So in the middle of the night, we would kind of walk to like a local restaurant, and they had their little dumpsters with the block walls around it, and we would kind of just sleep in there for the night. This was before they used to lock them up, and it was hard because as a kid, it didn't really hit me as it hits me now as an adult, thinking back, like like I can't believe a parent would do that with their kids. But as a kid, what did hit me was, all the mosquitoes and the bug bites and the spiders that I would wake up to, itching and scratching. It was pretty brutal. And I would complain, and eventually we would go to the store, and we would get these tents, and we would find houses that were not abandoned, but nobody was, I guess it would be kind of abandoned, but nobody was living in it. It's like they were in transition. And we would jump the backyards and build these tents, and we would live in these tents for a little bit. And that went on for quite a while. And we would take showers at like the local Jack in the Box or Taco Bell. We would go into the restroom and take what I call like a bird bath. And that's just kind of how it worked. And one of the worst things that I remember about that time of my life was washing clothes. There was never, we didn't have washing machines. My dad wasn't gonna go to the laundromat and sit there and wash clothes. So we would like take them, and after our bird baths, we would kind of just put soap on them and wash them inside the sinks. Well, eventually, our clothes started to smell really bad. So, I not only was itchy and red, I was also smelly, and just wasn't the greatest experience. And eventually his wife got out, and we started living in hotels again. But their lifestyle never changed. And one day we were, my older brother and I, we had gotten to the hotel room, and nobody showed up. It was getting later. It was getting dark, and it was very odd because a lot of the times when my dad went out and did things, he did them early in the morning, and they would be home, in the afternoons and all that stuff. So it was very odd, and it was very concerning. I still feel it to this day, like the weirdness in the situation that was happening, the anxiety that we had. And I was very concerned, and then eventually my grandparents showed up, and they told me that my dad had gotten arrested in Orange County, and he wasn't gonna come back home. And they told us that we were gonna go. My older brother and I were gonna go with them. So I moved into my grandparents' house, but at that time, we've already spent many years in the lifestyle that we were living in. It was at least 2 or 3 years, and sort of like I had mentioned earlier, in the years that I really only remember. I don't really have an earlier memory of my life to where I can kind of reference my behavior, my values. I don't really have anything to reference for. So in my mind, it was just all I knew was what I was doing and the way I was living. So my grandparents really tried hard to, instill good values in me, but, my mentality was, I like to say today, it was still corrupt, and I was unable to fully grasp what they were trying to teach me. And so I was out. I started doing my own things that, weren't productive, and eventually the state took me away from my grandparents. I went through a lot of different things, and then eventually I ended up in a boys' home. And in this boys' home, it was filled with a lot of people similar to kind of me, the situations that I was in. So I was able to get along actually with a lot of the other residents there. But I guess that was one of the first times I realized that some of the stuff that my grandparents were teaching me were valuable, because I started to, rather than kind of acting out to authority, I started to kind of just I was okay with authority at that point. And they sing that, and eventually we would go to court, and the judge would see how well I was doing in there, and he offered my grandma the ability to take me out of the boys' home. And what she had to do to take me out of the boys' home was she had to go to these state parenting classes, and these classes, for her to qualify to be my foster parent. And she did that, and she completed them, and then eventually I was released into her custody.
Man, you've covered a lot here. I mean, I think that probably most of us in this room couldn't even imagine an eighth of your story, let alone all of that. And we haven't even gotten, past your teenage years, as far as I can tell. Mm-hmm. If I could just ask a couple more questions. We didn't talk about this, but I am curious. When you were living in hotels, motels, ending up on the street, did you know that you were homeless? Was that a thing that you thought about, or was this just life as you lived it?
At that, I know now, but at that age, it kind of was just life. And I guess I would see, because I would still go to schools sometimes, and I would see some of my classmates. They had new clothes. They were, I used to smell, and I remember there was even a story where I didn't smell very well, and everybody in the class was like, "What is that smell?" And I was so embarrassed.
That's the worst. When you're young, that's the worst thing you could experience.
Yeah, and I was like, and I knew it was me, and so I was like, "Oh, I think I ran something over in my backpack. Let me go and wash it." And so I ran to the restroom, and I just threw everything away that I had that kind of smelled, and kind of came back with, just like a shirt and some pants, and I didn't have any socks, just kind of the shoes I had on. And I mean, I don't know if it worked or not, but I guess at that point I did start to notice that the way I was living was not the way everybody else was living that I knew. But as far as like, let's say, talking to my friends and saying, "Oh yeah, where do you live? Where do you live?" I didn't really consider myself homeless at the time. Even living on the streets, I don't know why. It just, at that age, I guess it's really hard to grasp the reality of the situation you're in.
Wow, man. So your dad was arrested. Your grandma steps in. She had. You said it to me this way, that I never had someone do something like this for me. And you're referencing her taking these classes on her own volition so that she could be your foster parent. Mm-hmm. Share a little bit more about what that felt like to you at the time.
Yeah. When they initially took us in, I kind of stated before that my mentality still wasn't the right mentality. So in the beginning, I kind of took it for granted. And that's also the reason why I ended up in the situation I ended up in later on. But, even though, we were homeless and we were living on the streets, and my dad was gone and I had no mom, and my grandparents took us in, being separated from my family, was a big reality. Being in the boys' home and not having anybody there that I'm really comfortable with, not being able to trust people the way you trust your family members. So when she took those classes and I got out, it was I was really grateful for it. And at that point, it started to change my life and change my perspective. I wasn't fully changed, but I was more grateful than I ever had been. Because like I told you, nobody nobody's ever done at least I felt at that time, and as I think about it back, even to this day, nobody's ever done something to me, for me, like that. And it really showed how much she really did love me.
Yeah, that's what strikes me about that moment specifically is what might have been for her a simple act of love. Like she might have thought of it as, of course I would do this, but this for you was a moment where you're like, I don't know if anyone's ever done something like this for me, and that starts to shift your perspective on life. There was after this, some time passes, and you get to what you phrase as the turning point in your life. What's the story to that point?
Yeah. So, like I said, I started to sort of realize that there's people out there, my grandmother, and that actually really care about me and that want me to do better. But unfortunately, it was still hard for me to really change what I know and all I really knew. And so around 18 years old, I'm back on the streets again, and I'm sleeping on park benches. I guess I was homeless again, and eventually I got a car, and I started sleeping in my car for a long time. Went back to taking bird baths in the local Jack in the Box, and I just never really seen a better path. Like for me, it was really all I really knew was kind of what I've learned living on the streets, and sort of that's kind of how I was living my life. And it wasn't until I met who's now my wife. Her name's Daisy. It wasn't until I met her was when I started to, you know, make a shift as much as possible. So I met her, we started dating, and she eventually got pregnant with our first child. And at that point, I decided that I didn't want to continue doing what I was doing, and I wanted to make an honest living. So I started to go to work. One job became two jobs became three jobs.
What kind of work were you doing at the time?
My very first job was, or at least when I was at that point, was I was working at a pallet yard. So I was stacking pallets all day, which is pretty rough work. And then from that job, I got a job forklifting at a warehouse, and I actually used the pallet job as so I was stacking pallets at the pallet yard, but I kind of told the new job that I was driving the forklift, and it worked, and I got hired.
You didn't crash the forklift like your first day or anything?
No, surprisingly, I was pretty good. Like I got the hang of it really fast, and so it worked out. And I started making a little bit more money at that job, and eventually I got another job working at a golf course. Just kind of, I was the cart kid. I would just take the carts and then wash them and then get them ready for the next person. So I would do those three jobs. I would go to the pallet yard in the morning, the warehouse job at night, and then I would work the weekends at the golf course. And then eventually we got an apartment. And and it was going decently, but like I still didn't really have a direct path to something better.
Tell me, that day you get the apartment, what does that feel like to you after all that work you've been doing, living homeless on the street? Like, what does that moment feel like to you?
Honestly, it was very exciting, because I know my wife was super happy. She always seen something in me, even through all the hard times, and so she always knew that I could do something like that. But I kind of didn't, like I was surprised, and the surprise led to excitement because my daughter was going to have a home, and so giving her something that I don't remember really having, and not just giving her something, but like making sure I continue on with it and really take care of her. It filled me with joy, and it filled me with a lot of grace.
That's amazing, man. So at this point, you have this big win, but still are feeling like it's not necessarily a ton of direction. I'm not sure exactly where I'm going. What happens then?
Yeah, so again, my mentality brings me back to uh, not doing the right things. I didn't have the right values instilled in me to make the best decisions. And so, unfortunately, I myself started drinking, started going out, and, just started just being a terrible person. And I would do things, especially when I was getting drunk and I was drinking, that would really upset my wife, and um, it breaks my heart to even talk about it now, because I feel bad that I even did that, because almost my whole life, everybody always told me, you're gonna end up just like your dad. You're gonna end up just like your dad. And I never believed them, because I'm like, no. You would figure you would see like an example of something that you know wasn't very good, and you would go
Not
the
want to
other
do it.
way. Yeah, but unfortunately, I didn't that didn't happen for me. So I started drinking, and it she threatened to leave, and take my kid, take my daughter, and that's what I really didn't want the most. And then she was always a great, good person. Her parents raised her very, very well. She always went to church, and I at that point I wasn't I wasn't a believer at that time. I never went to church as a child, and I was even sort of like antagonistic too, because I would always think like, if there was a God, then why would I be in the situation that I was in? Why would I grow up experiencing some of the experiences that I've experienced? Like, why would He do that? Um, but for the sake of my family, uh, my wife invited me to church. She said, we have to go. If you want this to work, just try it. Just give it a try. And so I decided to go. And one day we went to church, and I don't even remember what the sermon was about now, but it spoke to me. It was so crazy to even think about, because it was it was almost like they were speaking directly to me and speaking about me, And I know, obviously, it was a sermon that the pastor was preaching, but really felt a connection there. And now I know that it was God speaking to me, through the pastor, and really trying to help guide me to the right direction.
Man, so you have this moment in church feeling like God is speaking to you. The the next day, life totally different? Or was it a slow journey, a slow burn in the direction of starting to feel the Spirit work in you and different values? What was it like for you?
Yeah, so actually, honestly, that night leaving, I felt something different. Something really changed in me, because it's kind of like if anybody's here into fitness, it's kind of like, if you never work out at all, but then you start working out, you have sharp gains really, really fast. That's kind of how I was. I wasn't spiritual at all. I really didn't have any faith. So the leap from no faith to believing in something was really, really steep. And I made that leap almost immediately. And since then, I just been working on my faith and really trying to read the Bible more and listen to more sermons. I honestly I don't even care who it comes from. I just kind of want to hear what people have to say. Um, since then, and then just really trying to live my life to the values of Jesus Christ. And it's been hard. I've had a long way to go. So, just continuing to work on it and coming into this program, I like to say, like I had a lot of faith and I was or I am a believer. But just being in this program that I went through over here at Loma Linda has really strengthened that faith to a whole nother level. So yeah.
Yeah, man. So let's talk about that a little bit. You are starting to feel your life shift in a different direction, and you start to get into nutrition. And you're describing how you're telling everybody around you about nutrition, but they're like, "Bro, I'm like," it's like the friend who does all the research on Facebook or something.
Yeah.
And you're like, "I'm not listening to you," but you're like, "Okay, I got to do something with this." So tell us a little bit about what happened there.
Yeah, so I myself, I started to, see myself slow down a little bit, breathing a little bit heavier, going upstairs. But at my job at this time, because now I'm working at a different place. It was at like it was a construction company, but we also did like building materials manufacturing. So a lot of the people there, when we would go to lunch, we would go to the local Circle K. We would get big gulps. There was yeah, there's a lot of smokers there too, and uh, at that point, I was starting to learn about nutrition on my own a little bit, but then the real tipping point for me was I had a buddy there. His name was Diaz. He was friends with everybody. He was a really good guy. He would help you out. He was there for many years. He would teach everybody anything that he could. He went home one day and he was probably in his late 40s and he had a heart attack driving home and he crashed into the wall and he passed away. And so that was when I decided to try to, help other people with some of the stuff that I've been learning. And I know through my faith at that time, that was what Jesus Christ would want us to do. And so I really tried to, teach people and tell people certain things about nutrition and health. But, in certain environments and in certain, I guess you can call it like work cultures, uh, it's really hard to move people away from what they know, what they already do, some of their habits. And so
Yeah, I feel like in the construction arena, you come up, you're like, "Bro, let me tell you about carrots," and they're probably not going for it. So
exactly, not at all, not even close. And especially if you are just one of them, you're working alongside them. Like you barely know as much as I do. Like that's the mentality. And so at that point, I was like, okay, well, in order for me to actually make a difference and make a change, maybe I have to, get some type of credentials in this. At that point, I wasn't even considering like a registered dietitian. I didn't even know what a registered dietitian was at that point. I've heard of a nutritionist, but as I did my research, I found out that there's a difference between a nutritionist and a registered dietitian, and I really wanted to go for, I guess, I guess you can call it credential, because to me it was harder. It's harder to be a dietitian. Anybody can call themselves a nutritionist. So I was like, okay, I really want to do that because maybe I'll get the respect and the audience will actually listen to me if I am a registered dietitian. And so I started my journey. I looked up how to become a registered dietitian. It gave me the outline, and I started going through the steps one by one.
you ended up here at Loma Linda as part of that process, um, which is an interesting one because you didn't grow up in the Adventist church or anything like that. You're not Adventist. It's not a part of your story, but it is a Christian medical institution, and so you find out about this, and you describe how like I could go to a bunch of different schools, but you ended up really wanting to and putting in the work to get here. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so there's many different nutrition programs. You can go to Cal State San Bernardino. You can go to any of these other schools that are local, or even go farther away. But at this point in my life, I'm on this journey. I'm on this journey to really make a stronger connection with God, and to truly understand what it is to live by faith. And after doing all my research and everything that I've learned about some of these other schools, and then finding out about Loma Linda, and I just something spoke to me. Something spoke to me, and I felt like I was called over here to Loma Linda, and so I did more research on how exactly I could get into Loma Linda, because I knew that was where I wanted to go. I didn't apply anywhere else. I didn't even try anywhere else. I knew I wanted to go to Loma Linda because I knew that this was a school for me. Especially in the journey that I was in, I knew that somehow, some way, this will not only strengthen me in that journey, but it'll also help me achieve the goals that I want to achieve. And so I looked up or the requirements, the qualifications to get in, and I tried really hard to meet those qualifications. And luckily, and by the grace of God, I was able to meet the qualifications. I applied, and I did the interview, and I got in. So.
And as of this last June, you're a graduate of Loma Linda University, right?
Yes.
That deserves a hand, right? Yeah.
Thank you.
That's awesome. With all that said, man, you have, I mean, what a wild journey. As we talked about at the very beginning, like the trajectory of your life at 9 and 10 didn't look like it was headed in this direction. Having accomplished this, having set up not just yourself for a life that was different than how you grew up, but also setting up your family for a very different experience than you had. What are some of the reflections that you have looking back at all of that?
Well, I look back and I think it's really hard to, because it still hurts, to be honest with you, especially just not having my mom there. To this day, one of the worst days of the year for me is Mother's Day. It's definitely hard. Growing up, in school, during the Mother's Days, Father's Days, Thanksgiving, you would make things, and so while everybody's making things for their mom, I'm like, I couldn't participate, and they would ask like, oh, what are you making for your mom? And then, I never had an answer for them. And growing up, or as I'm grown, now my daughters, they know, but at some point in their lives, they're like, Dad, how come we've never met your mom? And that was a hard thing to go through with them, and because I had to explain to them, well, I don't have a mom, and it's always affected me. I remember when I was in when we were living in one of the hotels in Riverside, and I ran away from the room, and I ran away, and my dad came up, and he caught up to me, and I was just crying. And I don't know why, like it just that day, like something in me really hit hard. And he's like, "What's wrong?" And I just looked at him. I was crying. I was bawling. I was like, "Why don't I have a mom? Like, where's my mom?" It's like, I don't know. I just always feel like a lot of people, there's a good amount of people out there, that have a parent, that's maybe absent, but I don't know, I kind of feel like most people I know that do have a parent absent, they still always have their mom, like she never came around, and I don't even know what she looks like. I didn't know her name until I was like 25, and I had to look at my birth certificate. Um, so looking back, I know that affected me, and it still affects me. And I know that probably caused, some of the things that my dad did. Because I can only imagine maybe he wouldn't have met his second wife if he was with my mom. I mean, I don't know. Maybe she was just as bad. I have no idea. But I do know that with all the hard times, and while I would never wish it on anybody, I do know that I probably still wouldn't be who I am today if it wasn't for it. Because even though my dad never really taught me how to be a man, he never taught me how to conduct myself in society around people. Um, he never taught me any real values. Uh, what he did teach me was how to survive. And um, it may not have been the way that most people would like to survive, but I was still able to translate that into my early adult years. And in order to, when I knew that I was having a family, I knew that I wanted to be there for my family. And because of my ability to really work hard and do everything it took to survive, I knew that really helped me in where I'm at now. And including with going to school, and I was working full time going to school while also going to school full time. I would come home and maybe sleep 2-3 hours a day and go to school, and then come home, study, go to work. But I knew that I had to do that, and there was nothing that was going to stop me from accomplishing that.
It's amazing, man. I mean, you're breaking us. You have broken a cycle. There are some of us in this room who have experienced, not having one parent be what they're supposed to be. For you to have both parents not be what they were supposed to be, and for you to be at the place that you're at now. First of all, I just want to say, as a testament to you and to what the choices you've made, even given the incredibly bad hand that you were dealt in this life. We also were talking about how, and reflecting on how, you look back at your story and you just realize, if it weren't for God, kind of that, there's in Ephesians, there's a whole, in Ephesians chapter 2, there's 3 verses that talk about this is the direction we were heading, and then there's this transition phrase, but God, who is rich in mercy with a great love. It's the transition to a different story, and there's that moment in your life. And when you look back on your whole life, what do you see as that but God, if not for God?
So that moment has to be when my wife took me to church. That was the moment. While I can reflect back and find other instances where now I know God was there and God was with me, whether it was through my grandparents or through anybody else that was trying to help me, I know it within myself. It was that moment that I went to church with my wife, because while we were on a decent path, I still had no real guidance of where I was going, and that's kind of why I ended up starting to drink and started to do some of the behaviors that my dad had shown. But if it wasn't for that moment, then I know for a fact that right now, I mean, honestly, I wouldn't be here. I would have never went to school. Honestly, I would have probably ended up in jail for something. My wife would have probably left me. I might not have been able to see my kids again. So I know for a fact it was that moment that without God, I would have never ended up right here, right now.
Amen, man. I mean, as we wrap this conversation up, I just want to say, first of all, thank you so much for sharing your story and for being as vulnerable and open as you have been. To varying degrees, I know different people in this room can relate with different parts of your story, but all put together, it's your unique story. And I just want to ask, first of all, what's the correct diet? No, I'm just kidding. But second, what I want to really ask is just as you look at your life, what is something that you hope to communicate to others as a result of your story?
Looking back at my life, don't give up, don't quit, and while it may seem difficult, and while whatever you're going through might seem hard, as long as you have faith in God, He will always guide you down the right path.
Amen. Thank you so much, Anthony. I really appreciate you sharing. Can we give him a hand?
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for sharing that story, Anthony. Psalm 139 says this: "Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I go up to the heavens, you are there. If I make my bed in the depths, you are there. If I rise on the wings of the dawn, if I settle on the far side of the sea, even there your hand will guide me. Your right hand will hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness will hide me and the light become night around me, even the darkness will not be dark to you. The night will shine like the day, for darkness is as light to you." None of our stories are done. God is with us, and He's working on us, and He's calling us to something greater. And Anthony, thank you for sharing your testimony thus far. Your story's not done either, but God is with you in the valleys that you will inevitably experience, such as all of us in this room, in those mountaintop moments. God is still with us. He is with you. He is with me. So as we close this evening, let's leave this place remembering the presence of God is inescapable. And that is something to thank Him for. God, thank you that you are a God that cares. You are the God that loves deeply. You are a God that never gives up. And you give us that resilience. You've given Anthony that resilience as well. I thank you that even in the darkest moments, there are places where we can obviously see your hand at work, and you are doing something good on our behalf. So Lord, we thank you that none of our stories are done, that you have more work to do, and you are calling us to something greater. So as we leave this place tonight, remind us fervently and help us to see it deeply and clearly that you are here and you are good and you will never give up on us. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you for joining us this evening for another story. As we heard Anthony, have a wonderful rest of your weekend and your Sabbath.